Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of the brand new podcast that I created called I Don't Know What to Name This Show. My name is Sean Arguello, and this is basically going to just be a podcast about me talking about whatever I want to talk about. Pretty much, just whatever is on my mind, pretty much. And for today, I felt like it would be a good thing to talk about the classic film released back in 1933, King Kong. The original King Kong was an absolute spectacle, and a lot of the visual effects really helped revolutionize the film. Excuse me. I'm just so excited to finally talk about this film. And if I mess up, I'm going to just keep it going in one take, because that's usually how podcasts are. If people mess up, they mess up and they just move on. But this movie really helped change film for the better. It's groundbreaking special effects and just all the different techniques that they had to use in order to make this film are truly astonishing, and a lot of them are still being used to this day. As a matter of fact, one of the first ever film techniques that they actually used was the excuse me, it was the use of a rear projection. And rear projection is actually still used for a lot of movie driving scenes where you can actually see them, where they would have to get really creative, where they would project the background into a screen back behind them, sort of like a green screen. Instead of using just still images, they would actually project actual recordings of footage, and then they would just have the actor stand in front of them. So if they're filming inside of a car, they would be inside of a car, but the projection would, of course, project behind them, and thus giving the illusion that they are driving in front of heavy traffic or away from like explosions. And I think that it's truly amazing seeing how they would have to layer shots over one another. Like, say they're recording with stop motion puppets. Another huge part of the film is them actually using stop motion puppets. That's what King Kong actually is. But using the stop motion puppets, they would have to animate them, of course, frame by frame, and then just every time if they even messed up, every time they messed up, they would have to restart everything. They'd have to reposition the Kong puppet to the very beginning, and then you would pretty much have to start all over. But the way that they would work that into rear projection is they would sometimes have to take actual footage of actors, sort of like frame by frame, similar to stop motion, and they would animate them alongside King Kong and a bunch of other creatures that are on Skull Island. Or that they would take still images and project the actors in front of a green screen, and then they would just have the footage of the actual creatures on where we're paying attention to the actors in the foreground. But ultimately, they would have to combine these shots, and sometimes they would have to use something called forced perspective. This is a technique of when you actually move an object closer to the camera to give it the feeling that it's a lot bigger than it actually is. In one scene, actually, you can see Kong holding up the Ann Darrow, who is the main character. She's the main actress in the movie, who is the main actress of Carl Denham, who is the filmmaker who funds the expedition to Skull Island. Excuse me. So during one of the scenes, you can see Kong holding up the actress Fay Wray, who plays Ann Darrow. They actually would go as far as to build an actual life-size replica of Kong's hand so that Fay Wray can actually be held by the hand. And then they would use the Kong puppet and they would film it closer to the camera, so it would seem like this King Kong puppet, which was, I forgot how tall it was. I want to say like about between 6 and 10 inches, maybe even a foot tall. But they would actually move the Kong puppet closer to the camera to give it the illusion that he's a lot bigger than he actually appears. Now, forced perspective, I honestly love it. I love how it can give you the illusion that something's a lot bigger than it actually is. I've seen so many images on Google where there are so many just well done images. I mean, I could talk about forced perspective all day, but as of right now, I'm going to stick with King Kong. Speaking of the life-size models, they would actually go as far as to make the actual life-size model of King Kong's head, because there's one scene in particular where Kong is attacking a village, and he actually picks up one of the villagers and puts him in his mouth, so he's like chewing on him. So, excuse me, I wanted to sneeze there, but I guess I just couldn't. So anyway, one of the villagers is squirming around and screaming, whereas he is inside of King Kong's mouth, and it's pretty amazing seeing that they would build just this entire model of a head just so they can get a couple of scenes. They would actually reuse that head a few more times throughout the movie. I don't know off the top of my head how many times, but you can tell when they're using that because King Kong's face actually moves from the way that the actual puppet looks as opposed to when they're using the actual model of the head. Excuse me if I'm sniffling, guys. I just got over a cold. I don't know why I said that. But anyways, regardless, we're just going to keep this going. And another one of the most important film techniques, of course, I've already mentioned stop motion, but just seeing the behind-the-scenes footage, because I've tried making stop motion before, and it is not easy. I'm giving credit where credit is due, especially to the main person who worked on this movie, Willis O'Brien. Willis O'Brien was actually helped inspire many people in the filmmaking world, specifically Ray Harryhausen, who is a legend in the stop-motion animation department, and of course the director of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the 2005 remake of King Kong, Peter Jackson himself. Peter Jackson actually says that the original 1933 movie is actually his favorite movie of all time. And it's truly amazing. I remember the first time I saw King Kong on TV. I mean, of course, it is an older film. It's almost 90 years old, but I have to say that a lot of the effects honestly kind of still hold up. Well, of course, the technology is going to be outdated now, but it's still amazing seeing all the work, money, time, and effort that just went into making this movie in an era where silent films were still dominating cinema. So King Kong, like I said, was released in 1933. Sound films were pretty much still in their infant stages. And honestly, I think that it's truly amazing seeing that the sound design that went into King Kong, where they actually use real animals' roars, and they would actually combine them together to make King Kong's roars. I know they use a lion's roar. I think they also used a tiger's roar. They might have used a bear and an actual gorilla's roars to combine them to make the amazing sound design for King Kong, which honestly is extremely creative, especially back then when sound films, like I said, were still a new idea. But just seeing everything that had to go into making this movie, it's truly a masterpiece. And not only filmmaking, but as a story as well. It's a classic story, a timeless tale, if you will, of Beauty and the Beast. I mean, who would have thought that a movie about a giant gorilla who kidnaps a woman, fights off dinosaurs, gets captured, sent to New York, and climbs the Empire State Building would be widely considered as one of the greatest movies ever made? That alone is just simply mind-blowing. And honestly, I think it's just absolutely amazing just looking at this film as not only a cinematic achievement, but as a technical achievement as a whole. Because a little bit of backstory, the producer David O. Selznick, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, who was the production head at RKO Studios. I'm actually reading this on the Wikipedia page. He actually petitioned for the Academy Board of Governors to recognize the work that Willis O'Brien did for his work on King Kong. And this was actually sort of like the building blocks for the Best Visual Effects Oscar. I mean, yes, back in 1929 at the first ever Academy Awards, they had it was called the Best Engineering Effects, and that was actually given to the movie that ended up winning Best Picture, Wings. However, because of what Willis O'Brien did with King Kong, it was about 5 years later, in 1938, where the first ever Special Achievement Award for special effects was handed out pretty much. Then it was changed to Best Special Effects, and as we now know it, the Best Visual Effects. So because of Willis O'Brien and all of the work that he contributed on King Kong is pretty much why the Best Visual Effects Oscar is what it is nowadays. And honestly, I think that it's just absolutely amazing seeing that not only how much work went into it, but just seeing how influential this movie truly is. I mean, I know they teach you all the times that Citizen Kane, The Godfather, might be considered as the single greatest movies ever made. And although I can completely understand that, those movies were revolutionary in their own rights, King Kong was released 8 years before Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane was released in 1941. And honestly, I think that King Kong really stands out as a more classic story. It's an amazing story. It's a beautiful love story. It has some amazing effects and just so many scenes in it that are ranked amongst some of the most iconic in film history. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous scenes that I can think of is King Kong versus the giant T-Rex. I don't know why I put emphasis on giant there, but it was just King Kong versus the T-Rex. The T-Rex, as many people agree, myself included, is not only the best dinosaur. If your favorite dinosaur is different than that, then that's okay. This is just my own personal opinion. King Kong fights this dinosaur. The T-Rex is widely regarded as like the nature's perfect hunter. It is the perfect killing machine, if I'm being completely honest. And seeing King Kong pretty much fight off this T-Rex one-on-one and just ultimately overcomes it and ends up defeating it by pretty much ripping its jaw open, that's truly amazing, seeing that King Kong is not to be messed with. However, as many of those scenes that actually exist, there are some scenes that unfortunately no longer exist. Of course, that scene made the final cut of the movie, but there are several lost sequences, the most famous of which is the infamous insect pit. Now, this scene actually exists when the sailors are actually running away from a triceratops, and they come across Kong on a giant log bridge. On a giant log that's acting as a bridge. I probably should have made that a little bit more clear. King Kong actually picks up the log and starts rolling it around, which causes many of the sailors to fall to their deaths. However, that scene was originally supposed to continue. The scene is pretty much lost in history, and pretty much the only thing that exists now is a single frame where it looks like a giant spider-like creature and a two-armed lizard, which would actually be the main villains of the 2017 Kong Skull Island, which I think is pretty cool that those creatures, they're two-armed lizard things called skull crawlers. And like I said, those are the main villains of the movie Kong Skull Island. But that's a movie for another time. I'm focusing on the 1933 King Kong. What's pretty amazing is that this scene was actually brought to life in the 2005 King Kong. The 2005 King Kong, Peter Jackson actually filmed all of the actors in the insect pit, also known as the spider pit, and they would actually face off against all these prehistoric creatures and all these man-eating bugs and all these different insects. And I think it's just absolutely amazing that they were able to bring that historic lost scene to life. And something also that's pretty amazing, Peter Jackson and his film crew actually use the film cameras that they used to film the original King Kong, and they would actually use the same techniques. They would light it in the same way and film it in the same way. They would use stop motion to try to bring that scene to life, and they would reimagine it for how it truly is. And that scene actually exists as a bonus feature on the 2005 film as well as the 1933 film. Peter Jackson actually did not want that he did not want that scene to be put in the final cut of the actual 1933 film because he wanted it to be more along the lines of a bonus feature as opposed to putting his own creation into a classic movie. But it is truly amazing that seeing that the 2005 King Kong was able to bring that scene to life, as many people would have loved to see it actually take place in the film. But it is pretty cool that we were able to see how it would have possibly gone down in the 2005 film. But like I said, we're talking about the 1933 film, so we're not going to talk about the 2005 film more than that. And ultimately, I just want to say that the one last thing, really to finish this off, when King Kong is in New York, it creates one of the most iconic climaxes in film history. Everyone has seen a parody of this from somewhere, where it shows King Kong climbing the Empire State Building and where he meets his final stand as planes fly around and shoot at him. It is an absolutely heartbreaking scene. And honestly, I think that the 1933 film might have done it a little bit better. Because they've had remakes of King Kong in 1976, where even though I'm not the biggest fan of the film, I still can appreciate it for its amazing scope. Honestly telling the story, the love story specifically between, well, I don't want to really say love story, but the story of Kong and Anne, who in the 1976 film is named Dwan for some reason. D-W-A-N. Dwan. I still don't understand that, but I think that the connection between those two is better than Kong and Anne in the 1933 film. Simply because all Anne does in the first film is just scream. Now, I can completely understand that because she doesn't want to die and she's in the clutches of this giant gorilla. Obviously, I mean, I would be freaking out, wouldn't you? But I honestly think that the 1976 film does that relationship better, and I think 2005 actually does that relationship and just takes it a little bit further. Well, kind of further. That's more focused as like friendship, of like two. It's not really like Kong being. How do I phrase it? Kong's really just looking for more like a friend, and since he's the last of his kind, he's very lonely. And Anne really acts more along the lines of a friend in the 2005 film. But like I said, I'm not talking about that today. I don't know why I brought that back up. But anyway, going back to the 1933 film, Kong basically just wants to be alone with him and Anne. And he goes to the top of the Empire State Building, and he actually meets his demise at the hands of all these planes. Although Kong puts up a good fight, it is no match for the king as he is shot down and falls to his death in the streets below. I seriously don't understand why this isn't considered as... I mean, many people consider it to be one of the greatest films of all time. It's not hard to see why people would say this is the greatest film of all time. It has an amazing story, groundbreaking effects, some really good emotion, and it's just overall just something that truly needs to be seen to be believed. It's truly a spectacle, and in my opinion, this movie excels in every way. It is truly the king of monster movies, the single best monster movie ever made, and Rotten Tomatoes calls it the best horror movie ever made. It is a classic tale, a timeless story with some amazing effects to help pretty much tie it all together with a nice bow on top. It is truly an amazing film that I highly recommend. This film actually gets a 10 out of 10 from me. I definitely recommend you check it out. And if you have already seen it, go and watch it again. because there's always something new that you will see every time you watch this movie. Now, with all of that being said, I want to thank everyone for listening to me talk about this movie. And if you guys have any suggestions for anything that you want to hear me talk about, just let me know in the comments down below on this YouTube video or from wherever you get your podcasts. Please, I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. My name is Sean Arguello saying goodbye for now, but not forever. I'll see you guys in the next video. You have a good one.